Good evening. This is Roberto Carta of Kersim Dental, and I'm very excited to kick off Implantology Talks, a series of interviews with some amazing dental masters. With these talks, we would like to implant confidence, to stress once again how important digital technologies are, not only to place an implant in full safety, but also as key factor to improve patient care and satisfaction. Over the course of the next 5 days, this platform will serve as a stage to share experiences during these challenging times, to discuss specific implantology topics and views about digital dentistry. We would like to thank the Digital Dentistry Society for their patronage to this event and their supervision over the topics and the clinical questions, and Slow Dentistry for their support to this initiative and for being ambassadors of trust and confidence for good dental care. And thank you for joining us for this series and to those who will submit questions for our speakers. With that, let's get started. I am delighted to introduce the host of our implantology talks. He is the founder and clinical director of White Clinic in Lisbon, which specializes on complex cosmetic oral rehabilitations. He is an active member and expert provider of Dental SP since 2006 and international lecturer and vice president of the Digital Dentistry Society, DDS. He focuses on his philosophy, no half smiles. He has been the creator and producer of makeover TV shows in Portugal and US, and starred in the first ever documentary on dentistry produced by the National Geographic. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Miguel Stanley. Miguel, I can see you are there.
Hey, how are you doing, Roberto? Hope you're staying safe in this extraordinary times that we live in. And I really want to thank you for such a warm welcome and introduction. And thank you so much for honoring me with allowing me to interview these amazing dentists. I mean, these guys are the best of the best. And you've been so gracious at putting all of this together, an amazing initiative in this difficult time for everybody, allowing, dentists around the world and industry leaders and people within the industry to learn from the experience, such as of our next guest, who's literally at the top of the apex of education in digital implant dentistry. And I'm really looking forward to this series of interviews. So thank you.
Miguel, it's us to thank you because you have accepted this invitation. It's a lot of time off your clinic, and it's just great to have you with us. Look, let's get to it, because I can't wait for this first interview on state of the art in digital dental technologies. So over to you to introduce tonight's special guest.
Well, thank you very much. It's a distinct pleasure to introduce our next guest. Dr. Scott D. Ganz is a world-renowned speaker, mostly in the field of computer utilization for diagnostic, graphical, and treatment planning applications in dentistry. He completed a 3-year specialty program in maxillofacial prosthetics at the Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, Texas. And he's also published a book that has been sold in over 20 countries called An Illustrated Guide to Understanding Dental Implants. And he's come up with some amazing concepts, such as the triangle of bone concept, which I know a lot of dentists talk about, and his very famous quote, brain-guided implant dentistry, which I've seen so many young dentists mention and probably don't even know that came from the amazing Scott Ganz. He's an amazing humanist, a caring person, somebody we all love. And if you've never seen him on stage, please try and find out what he's talking next, because the way he packs information in his presentations, always up to date and have been consistently over decades. It's actually quite a unique feat in dentistry today. So it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Dr. Scott Ganz to the very first of the series of interviews. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well, Miguel. It's so nice to be able to see you, even though we can't give each other a big hug. It's just wonderful to see your smiley face.
Well, I know that you have an incredibly packed schedule. I know you are in between 2 full arch cases. And I know that, how much time you put into those things, and hopefully you can show us a little bit of your work in a while. You know, talking to a guy like you, and I know you and you're my friend, and we always talk about so many other things other than dentistry when we get together. But if you had to introduce yourself and your work, or if I know you're very, very humble and very low key, but if you had to do it, what would you say about yourself and your work? What would you like people to know about your life's work?
Well, you know, that's, as you say, it's not something that we normally talk about too much about our own um, accomplishments. But, you know, my career has been very interesting because, you know, if you had asked me when I was much younger if I would ever become a dentist, I would have thought, you know, I would have said I would never even think about that. But, you know, here we are many, many years later, and it's truly amazing, you know, that the field of dentistry has grown to encompass so many amazing parts of technology. And so I've always been involved in technology since I was a kid, since I was in maybe junior high school and high school, working with computers, doing coding when I was young. And so the technology that computers brought to the table for so many different, you know, types of applications. As an example, when we were talking about, let's say, figuring out a grade point average for your you know, high school year, you know, back when I went to high school, which of course was in prehistoric times, everything was done manually. Today, everything, of course, is done, you know, with computers. And in fact, our smartphones are more powerful than pretty much anything that we used, you know, way back when. And so, you know, so my interests have always been involved in some way with technology. And I was also an avid photographer back then. And, you know, I can tell you that back in the early days, when I had already become a dentist, and when we were trying to take, you know, intraoral pictures, and when we were using to lecture, to you know, load up our carousels of slides to give a presentation somewhere in the world, and we would carry, as you remember, you know, big, you know, duffel bags full of slides. There was a time when we started to take those slides and put them into the digital format so we can utilize them in a PowerPoint presentation. And so I used to teach, you know, people how to do that, how to digitize their photographs. And, you know, interestingly enough, I remember saying, you know, that an intraoral camera, a digital camera, I should say, like a regular, let's say a Nikon or a Canon camera, I would say would never be as good as this little Kodachrome slide, because I never thought we could ever reach the point where a regular, you know, camera, a film camera, could be beat by a digital camera. And that was one of the things that I was really wrong about. I mean, you can see where the digital world has taken photography and videography and the movies. And so, you know, putting all of those technologies together has really been the focus of my career, as I can do that within the boundaries of dentistry, within the boundaries of not just using it for implant dentistry, but beyond, because I think the technology, the platforms are there. And what I always like to think is that I've had the imagination to be able to do the things that I've done, and I would like to be able to instill that thought in other people from an education standpoint, because truly we are limited only by our imagination today.
So what you're saying is that, like there's that saying, life imitates art, or does art imitate life, that you had this innate love and passion for digitization, and, you know, due to the extent of your career. So for example, what year did you give your first lecture in? Do you remember?
Yeah, probably. I think, well, interestingly enough, when I was in college, in pre-dental, and if you would have told me that I would be on a stage lecturing to somebody, I would also have told you, you know, that's probably not in the cards. I was actually very political, though. I was always kind of involved in politics and in like the student government, and so I was always in front of people. But when it came to actually giving presentations, it actually started in dental school, and I have to say it wasn't really my idea. I guess I have to give credit to some of the professors that I was with. I guess they saw that I had some talent, and they pushed me along, and they said, why don't you get up there and put this lecture together? We'd like to hear your thoughts. And as I started to do that, I'm sure you probably have the same thought, Miguel, that why would anybody want to listen to me? Why would anybody care about what I have to say? Because you don't really think it's unique. And it sometimes takes a long time for you to realize that maybe what you have to say is unique, and or maybe you're telling the story in a different way. And
Well,
so yeah, I started when I was in dental school.
not just that, it's when you're young, you're very insecure at exponentially insecure about the information that you have, but you've managed to do something, and I hope the younger generations listen to this, which is overcome that fear. But you've done something which I find fascinating, is that you've never stopped, you've never rested, and the amount of information you absorb and digest continuously every single day. I mean, and the amount of new technologies coming up, it's like I can ask you about anything and you'll have an opinion about it. And how much time do you spend studying technologies? I mean, do you ever rest?
Yeah, you can ask my wife. She will tell you that I don't rest. But yeah, I think we're overwhelmed actually with technology today, and I think that's it's one of the problems that exist right now. And I know we're gonna go into some of these things in more detail, but I believe that we're kind of at an impasse in several different ways. And what's also interesting is how technology has been adopted around the world. Obviously, I'm in right now in New York City. I have another practice that my focus mainly is in New Jersey, in the U.S. And like the East Coast of the U.S. and the West Coast of the U.S. We have different ideologies maybe on certain things. But how about where you are? In Portugal, and where our friends in Italy that you're going to interview subsequently in these sessions to come, and in Marrakesh and all over the world, we all have to be able to communicate, and the digital world has become our universal language. But part of the problem is that the young people, and maybe this could be a message as well, because I know you like to deliver these messages, Miguel, because you do it so well. And that is that you can't get that wonderful result unless you put in the time. And when we're talking about especially guided surgery applications and some of the things that we do, it does take time to study. It does take time to prepare. It does take time to create these records. None of these things happen by just pushing a button.
That's an amazing message for the younger generations and for those that wish to stay in the game. And I love the way that you said that this new era, that digital has become a common language, and we're so grateful that we have all of these awesome tools to communicate with each other. And that's one thing we'll get into in a bit. But you're in New Jersey, the East Coast. It's been heavily hit by COVID since the outbreak. And you are a very busy surgeon, and you do these amazing cases, full arch cases. How did that take an impact in your business, and what were the major changes that you had to implement to be doing 2 full arch surgeries today?
Again, all of that is in the planning. And so when you have the tools that we have today, I mean, I was first exposed as an example to the use of CT, computed tomography, back in the middle 1980s. And when I was actually practicing not far from where I am today, in 1985, I was working with one of the really true pioneers of implant dentistry, Dr. Lenny Linkow. And when doing blade implants and subperiosteal implants, and then eventually doing root form implants a la Branamark and some of the other designs that were out at the time. And Even today, I mean, there are people that are doing implants with panoramic radiographs, but back then that was, you know, the only tool. And then when we discovered that, yeah, we know what, we could send a patient across town to an imaging center and have a three-dimensional image that we could interact with, was truly unbelievable. But the interactivity at that time was film. We would get these CT images on huge film, you know, the size of chest X-rays. And so we as dentists, we didn't have light boxes that big. And so we're always holding it up to the light and we're looking at all of these images. It wasn't until 1993, which is about 8 years later, that we actually had the ability to interact when Windows platform became popular and the first interactive treatment planning software became available in 1993, which was the Simplant platform. And so we've been down a long, long road. As the technology has advanced, we're learning how to incorporate more and more of it to the benefit of our patients.
It's incredible, and I'm, you know, one of the things that I've seen in all of these advances, and that the language is getting easier to use as well, but there's still a long way to go in the patient's understanding that, you know, if they're going to have an implant done or complex bone reconstruction done, that they have a right to, you know, at least ask that their doctor has seen a CT scan, you know. I think some statistics that I heard that only 15% of practices in the US have a CBCT. Why do you think that is? And we can get into that in a bit, but just I'm really curious to what do you think are the biggest challenges in getting more dentists to become digital?
I think it's really summed up in one word, and that's education. And when, you know, maybe you can also address this in terms of, you know, your vast knowledge about education outside the US. I can only, of course, speak mostly knowing what's happening in the US. And I can tell you that, you know, from the time I graduated from dental school, you know, prehistoric times to where we are today, the curriculum hasn't changed that much, because their goal is to have a doctor walk out the door with a degree of doctor of dental medicine, or DDS, doctor of dental surgery in the US. And the interest is not really to be able to get the clinicians up to speed in terms of state-of-the-art technology. And so it took years to even get the cone beam CT into the dental schools. I mean, years and years and years. And so who was teaching this? And so when a dental student graduates and comes out of school, they're going to use what they were taught. And so, look, you, Miguel, as an educator, you've been all over the world educating clinicians on these things, and many of our colleagues that you will now interview for this series, they're all wonderful, incredibly talented educators. And if the dental schools did the right job, we would be out of a job, because we would, what are we going to be educating on? And so part of the reason why we don't have as much adaptation for these technologies is because of a number of reasons. But the number one is that they're not taught in dental school. And so they have to continually seek out those educational opportunities. And once they do, once they learn how important that is to at least utilize cone beam CT in their practice for diagnosis and planning, maybe they can't afford to buy the machine, but they know someone that has one, or they know an imaging center down the block that has one, and they can refer the patient out so they can use the technology without necessarily having to make a huge investment.
I think that's a great way to begin our second part of this interview. And I'm going to segue into a few questions I have here for you, because I think that's just a very important message. And I hope that the deans of universities around the world are listening to this. So, in light of your experience, what are the two key factors determining success of digital technologies in dentistry?
Well, I think there's actually many more than two, but if we have to narrow it down, it's, you know, again, I'm going to go back to the concept of imagination. You can have technology in front of any doctor, any dentist, any person, whether it's a smartphone or if it's a intraoral scanner, and unless they understand how to use it, then it becomes almost meaningless. But in terms of what we do every day with our patients, I think three-dimensional imaging by far is the absolute foundation for everything that we do, at least in the area of dental implants, oral surgery, orthodontic surgery, maxillofacial surgery, any one of those areas. Without an understanding of the three-dimensional picture of the patient. And when I say that, I think I have to clarify, because what I truly mean is that every single person that we see is different. Their anatomy is different. And you don't understand how different that anatomy is unless you can assess it in 3 dimensions. And a 2-dimensional Panorex or a periapical X-ray can only tell you just a small fraction of what's going on within that patient. And so by having those images, you then have to know how to interpret those images. And that again goes back to our education, because you can have that cone beam, and we all know, and Miguel, some of our colleagues, that they'll take a cone beam CT just so that medical legally they're covered. Yeah, I took a scan, and then they'll look at the scan for like three or 4 minutes and say, yeah, I can get 5 implants there. Sure, that's not using technology. And so we have to have a real understanding of, and also the time, and that's where our younger generation, it has at least a leg up on some of us older guys, because they've grown up with digital, they've grown up with smartphones, they've grown up with AirPods and all the other things that are in our lives today. And so the cone beam CT is the foundation, and then the other key ingredient is what I would call integration. And that means that you have so many other technologies, such as an intraoral scanner that will capture the inside of a patient's mouth, which of course we can use for many other purposes as well. But that alone, for dental implant planning, combined with cone beam CT, creates an exponential factor on our ability to diagnose and treat implant. So it's cone beam CT as a foundation, and then integration of the other technologies, and that would include 3D printing and all the other things that we can talk about in a little while.
I like that, because a lot of people around the world, they reach out and they say, if I had to start going into digital, where I start with them. I think it's kicking off with you. So the CBCT cone beam as the foundation stone for access into digital implant or digital bone surgery of any kind, and then the ability to integrate that into any other software or technologies through education. I think that's fantastic. Now, if you could change something in your career, I mean, you have an incredible career, published books, articles, you sit on the board of many societies. One we sit on together, the Digital Dentistry Society. If you could change anything just in the last 30 years, just anything that would have an impact in your career today, what do you think it would be in digital dentistry, of course?
That's an interesting question, because it's not so easy to answer for probably almost anybody, because over 30 plus years. I mean, I put my first implant in 1982, which is in ancient times. And when we start to look back at where we've come, in many ways, we haven't progressed that much in many ways. And when I look back to answer that question, I can remember, and I have videos of this, where I was lecturing in front of maybe 2,500, 2,500 people at the Academy of Osseointegration meeting in 1995, so 25 years ago. And I truly believed back then that within 2 or 3 years, everybody would be adopting these technologies. And I guess I was naive, because I really thought that what I was talking about, 3-dimensional imaging, 3-dimensional diagnosis, merging technologies, looking at biomedical models, doing all of those things to enhance our ability to treat our patients, I just thought everybody got it, and they didn't. And in fact, they don't even get it today, and in many circles. And so I guess if I were to change anything, it would be to not have been so naive and to realize that it was going to take another 25 years to get to where we are today.
That's actually quite sad. And, as you were talking, I had one word in my head, which was, care more, and I have a slide in one of my lectures, I think you've seen it, which is a beautiful sports car. And it says, it's better to have cool technology in your clinic than a fancy car in the garage. And, with so many dentists coming out of school in America with, $280,000 or $300,000 debt, I think sometimes the brainwaves might get a little bit changed, and trying to go down the financing, the becoming financial engineers. I'm not, I'm generalizing. And of course, the costs of these technologies are expensive. But what you're saying is that you have to care. You have to care enough to at least want to do it. And what do you think would be your suggestions for dentists that aren't yet digital and want to start digitizing their practice? What would you suggest is the entry into the world? You've already mentioned CBCT as the founding cornerstone of that, but if I want to start getting digitalized, how would you suggest they begin?
Again, that's an essential question, because we know today that even with all of the wonderful technology that we have, it's going to take probably past my lifetime before we truly get completely away from the analog way of doing things. And so I would say even the people that are the most involved with digital dentistry, there's still a mix of analog and digital together. And so I think there's somewhat of a misnomer sometimes when we talk about digital stuff, because people then try to think, well, and that's where the brain guided concept kind of came in, that we have now given the decision-making process to the computer. And that's the furthest thing from the truth. We just have more and more tools and better tools that allow us to take that information, to process that information better. And so the foundation, again, is going to not just be to buy all these toys, because I'm sure you remember, in your youth, which was only about 4 or 5 years ago, compared to mine. But when we think about so many of the technologies that we may have invested in that sat in the closet, or became a coat hanger, in the office because it was something that we didn't use. So my first piece of advice is, don't buy anything if you don't know how to use it. And again, that goes back to education. Unfortunately, a lot of people do look at what we do on the major podiums and in our articles or webinars or whatever today, especially. They may see that we're using something and they go out and buy it, and then they get disappointed. They say, oh, gosh, Dr. Ganz showed me this wonderful technique. I can't emulate it, and I can't duplicate it. And part of it is because, you just can't push a button. You have to put the time in to learning what the flow is of the protocols to get to use them properly.
I think that one of the, and I'll ask you that last, but I think one of the big issues is that, when you go and buy a technology at a trade show, or, with a specific salesperson, they might be very focused on getting, the added value the technology brings in, but then they undersell many times the time it takes for you to integrate that into your workflow. But you bring it back to education. And I don't know about you, but I think that, for almost every single new technology, such as a CBCT or an iOS scanner, you almost need an extra brain in the clinic, and definitely more time in your workflow. If you're going to do it yourself, you got to set that time aside. If you don't have time to do it yourself, make sure you've got people on your team that can do that. Would you agree with this?
Yes, and they have to be properly trained. And again, that goes back to education. And many of these tools can be utilized by our auxiliary staff, for sure. There's no rule that an intraoral scan has to be done by the clinician. I mean, the auxiliary can do that, I believe, in most countries, in the US certainly. And once you adopt the technologies, it just becomes second nature. And now, is there going to be a place still for physical impressions, using our impression materials? Again, I don't think that's going away, not in my lifetime. But I believe, I kind of learned. I'm not as naive as I was, back in the late 1980s and early 90s. I understand the writing on the wall. It's in order for us, going back to the basics, it requires a behavioral change. And again, people are not so willing to make a behavioral change, whether that's packing cord and taking an impression with an infragum type impression material or polyvolume siloxane, or doing an intraoral scanner and doing it that way, and then trying to figure out, okay, well, I just took this great image. Now what do I do with it? Again, you have to know what the protocols are. One of the things that I always like to say is that, and I've seen this like so many times, that you get one of these clinicians and they buy this wonderful state-of-the-art intraoral scanner. Let's say the Carestream 90, 3700. It is fabulous. I have that. I love it. It is fabulous. But yes, it's not going to make you a better dentist in this way. If you prep the tooth and you wave that magic wand over the tooth, it doesn't make the prep better. You still have to make the prep in the right way. And so but what it does is if you actually use the technology and you look at that image on the screen and you rotate it around, you say, hey, you know what? I missed that margin, or that's an undercut there. I got to change that. Then you go back to the patient, you make that adjustment, you take a new scan. It's not like, you're spending money on the impression material and putting the patient through that aggravation. Now it's just taking a million pictures. It goes on the screen. That will make you a better clinician.
That's great. Now, and I'd agree 100% with you. And that's a very interesting debate with the scan and the traditional impression. You really got to put in the time to prep everything. Now, you've already mentioned that the CBCT is the cornerstone for the entry into digital, but let's just say I'm not a practice focused only on implant dentistry. We do implant dentistry, but we are, let's say, a general family practice. We are we do some implants. I'm getting started. What would be the first entry level digital technology that you would suggest would be the ideal first purchase to go into the digital world?
Well, believe it or not, if you're looking for the first, I'm going to say that you should have an intraoral camera, like a Nikon or a Canon, to take pictures, to document. I think that's one of the weakest areas that we have, is that we're not documenting the before and the after and the during. And I think that when you do that, and the reason why I'm saying it is because you help to develop your own eye as to what is good and what is not good. I mean, you and I, we look at Facebook and LinkedIn and social media. We see our colleagues posting stuff I would never post. I'm sure you would never post, but they think it's great. And they're, especially people that, they're doing their first type of case that they've ever done. And now all of a sudden they become a world's expert. So now, because we have this social media platforms, they can post these cases, they become a world expert and they develop a following. But you have to know what good is. And I think an intraoral camera helps to do that. Now, of course, an intraoral scanner becomes can in some ways become an intraoral camera as well by taking images, but they're a little bit different in terms of if you want to evaluate your preps, you want to evaluate other things that are going on in the patient's mouth. But an intraoral scanner, I think, would be one of the best investments going forward, and especially as you phrased it, because an intraoral scanner can be used for such a variety of different purposes. Now we're, there's a commercial all the time on our TVs in America about, the correction of orthodontic problems with aligners, and of course most of the aligners are done totally digital today. And so if you have an intraoral scanner, that immediately gets you into that market much faster.
And you can always outsource to a local CBCT scanning center down the road if you don't want to make that big investment. but you and I both know having them both in the practice is a game changer. So,
and a huge practice builder as well.
Without a doubt, without a doubt. And what for you would be the correct relationship between research and clinical work in digital dentistry? And what can we do in order to be confident about the products and procedures proposed by the manufacturers?
Well, that's a really good question. You know, as a consultant to the industry for the past 30 years, one of the things that I did learn, and in some ways, I almost don't want to let the cat out of the bag, but I think it's important to do so, and I think you'll understand immediately what I'm talking about. Again, I used to be naive. I used to think, hey, you know, I'm a clinician that wants to do research. I want to be able to train other dentists, but I also want to learn new technologies, and I want to help develop new technologies. And the only way you can develop new technologies is, you know, as we know, through trial and error, or to change a design of a drill or a surgical guide or an implant or a prosthetic connection. And we have to have the platform to do that, and the resources to do that. And so I, as a consultant to many companies over many years, try to do that. And I really kind of found that there's a reluctance with many companies to actually listen to what we have to say. You know, you know, Steve Jobs has a quote that I will paraphrase, and it's something to the effect of that: we don't hire consultants because we want to tell them what they should do. We hire consultants so they can tell us what to do. And so so my perspective is, in our implant industry, in our dental industry, specifically on implants, and even in 3D imaging and technology, sometimes they're not really listening to what we have to say. And then the surprising thing is that most of the decisions are not made because of research. They're made by the marketing department. It's all about marketing. It's all about what's going to sell. And so, I mean, I guess that's true with any business, but I have to, I mean, that's really truly an honest picture of what happens in our dental world that we live in. And it shouldn't be about marketing. It should be about true research. It should be about what actually does work, what actually you know, will create a problem for you in your practice. And so we do need more funding. We need more avenues to be able to do that. And you know, I can tell you that I've brought research projects to my alma mater, to my dental school. They're not really interested because they're more, you know, they have a curriculum, again, with the post grads, that they have to teach the basic stuff, you know.
But you know, one thing I do like are these highly focused companies. And look, you know, we're guests here of Carestream Dental, and I was looking at, you know, the 9600. They've got this new, and they didn't ask me to talk about this, but they've just updated the software for airway, and to understand airway and sleep apnea and all of that. And I was just like, you know, I didn't ask for that, but the fact that that simply popped up in the updated software, I'm like, I've now got a whole new department in my practice dedicated to airway, thanks to this diagnostic tool that we have. So I think that there's a lot of good things happening, but I do think that education in universities definitely needs to get with the times, because these kids are coming out of school learning things from way back, and I don't think it should be tech companies and implant companies leading the way. I definitely think it should be universities, and I would agree with you on that we need to start breaking down some more walls. Scott, I really enjoyed these answers, and I'm sure people will as well. Would you like to blow us away just with some little bit of your work, so you can talk us through how you connect all of your softwares in clinical settings?
Sure. But give me 1 minute, because I want to comment on what you just said about Carestream and about certain companies that we're dealing with, because I think that's really important for our audience to know about, and not just because Carestream is the host for this series, but it's because
but Scott's not getting paid. You're not getting paid
No,
for this.
no.
There you go.
No. I didn't even get a free lunch. In fact, this is my lunchtime, so I'm not even eating. But I can tell you that I've been in this industry way too long to work with companies that are not progressive, that do not want to listen to what we have to say, that are open to our input. And that's one of the things that drew me to working with Carestream on different projects. And I have to say that I've been incredibly impressed with not only their willingness to listen to what we have to say, but as you said, their willingness to constantly update and improve their product line. Now I have the CS9600. I think it's an absolutely fabulous device, cone beam CT, and what is to me a small thing as an example. Within the cone beam CT, we can take the image, and you know that oftentimes patients have metal in their mouth, they have other crown and bridge work or other things, and when you take a scan, I'm sorry?
More than ever.
Yes, and so you take a scan and you have all of this scatter that occurs. And so one of the things that they have developed is a fabulous algorithm that removes a huge amount of that scatter, so we can see those images on their native Carestream software, which they call their metal artifact reduction, MAR. And that one small ingredient, it goes a long way to help our diagnostic ability to be able to interpret those images, without some of the clutter that goes on, which becomes really, a difficult thing to deal with when you're trying to visualize a particular area and it's kind of all, obliterated because you have scatter coming from across the arch. And the other thing that I think was really interesting at the beginning to me, because obviously I have been involved with many of the development of several software applications, and the one that I'm using primarily now for my implant planning is a totally free software, Blue Sky Bio, and that's another company that's very progressive in changing and updating, and they do their own research. But when I go to my CS9600 and I want to then take the planning to the next level, which I may be able to show you in a few minutes, is that I have a link on the Carestream. I can just push that link and it automatically exports that into the Blue Sky Plan software, and it's a seamless connection. And so like that, and also with the practice management software, where we can integrate all of these areas to be able to put all of this information together. I mean, that's what we need, and we need that integration, which is kind of what I mentioned, a while back in our talk.
How do you do your magic? How do you connect all the dots in your clinical workflow? Because I'm always blown away by the cases you present, my friend. What have you got for us here today?
Yeah, let me show you a couple of things. Give me a second to pull this up here. So, one of the keys to my philosophy is that we often have myths and realities in our profession, and one of those is this concept of restoratively driven implant dentistry. And what that means to us is that the goal of implant dentistry is not the implant, it's the tooth. I mean, our patients are coming to us because they need teeth. They're not coming to us because they need implants. And so how can we deliver restoratively driven implant dentistry? How do we do that without the digital tools that we have today? I mean, as an example, if we take a cone beam CT on a patient and we get this beautiful three-dimensional rendering, and it happens to be a patient that's totally edentulous, well, the only thing we can see is the bone. We don't have any way of determining where the teeth are unless we took that extra step and we created a diagnostic wax up, where we used their existing dentures and we created fiducial markers and we scanned them in a dual scan protocol, merge that information together so that we can appreciate where the teeth are in relationship to the underlying bone. So this is also what I talk about when I talk about the need for an understanding of how we can utilize the technology to our best advantage. And so everything that I do with regard to especially guided surgery, you cannot do guided surgery unless you know the prosthetic outcome before you ever touch the scalpel to the patient. So that's where it becomes extremely important for us to really truly utilize the technology to our best advantage. And so my philosophy, again, as we discussed, is that there are two technologies that I think are very important right now that I will not do implant dentistry without. We've discussed already the advantages of cone beam CT, but I just wanted to mention the second one, which is the ability to understand if the implant can be loaded, what is the integration process that happens to an implant over time, and that is the resonance frequency analysis and implant stability quotient. And so when I talk about 3D imaging, when I talk about like the art and the science of 3D imaging, it's how we integrate all of these pieces of the puzzle together. And so as an example, if somebody came into your office as an 84-year-old patient and fractured a tooth like this, well, this is a difficult bridge to be able to make to a patient, especially you wanted to do it as an immediate type of replacement for her. Would you give her a partial denture to replace this single tooth? And this was really an educated patient in my practice, and she understood that we could take this tooth out, and in the same day we could make an implant-supported tooth for her, even though she's 84 years old. Because in my estimation, we're only as old as we feel, and we want to have quality of life. Would I take this tooth out and put an implant in without a cone beam CT? And the answer is absolutely not. And so what we're learning from the cone beam CT is, again, that unique anatomy for that patient, whether it's going to be for a full arch or as simple as a single tooth implant, which is often not simple. I think a single tooth implant replacement sometimes is the most difficult thing that we have to do in dentistry. And so you can see from this image on the left of the screen that the trajectory of the tooth is different than the trajectory of the bone. And when we start to plan implants with our simulated software, we have to know the density of the bone. We have to understand the thicknesses of the cortical plate, the opacity of the cortical plate. And only then can we start to plan the implant placement. And you notice that in the red simulated implant, and then you see the yellow projection. That projection is what we call an abutment projection. At least that's what we termed it back in the early 1990s. And when we look at that, because it's exactly the same type of planning that we did when Simplant was first introduced back in 1993, you'll notice that trajectory is what tells us where the screw access hole would emerge if we're doing a screw retain type of prosthesis. And so when we have the ability to understand that in 3 dimensions, this is where we have to be very careful, whether we're doing a guided approach or we're going to do something as a freehand approach. Now, in our textbooks and many of my articles, I talk about diagnostic freehand. So this would be a case where we're doing diagnostic freehand. We understand the dimensions of the bone. We understand where the tooth position is. We understand the goal is to provide the patient with another tooth. And now, can we place the implant? Can we load the implant? Or are we going to do a screw retained or cement retained restoration? This is what the software and the hardware will allow us to be able to view, to be able to digest, to be able to understand, so that our diagnosis and treatment planning processes are complete. So as an example, when you're looking at this particular image, well, it's not just about replacing the tooth. I mean, if you look at the literature and we talk about, well, an implant should be 3 millimeters from a natural tooth, etc. It's really not about that. And if you look at those original articles, they were measuring without CT. What we're really talking about is, in this situation, is root proximity to the adjacent teeth. How could you see that in a periapical X-ray or a Panorex? You cannot see that. And so although this is a case where we're doing freehand surgery, that's because I'm experienced. I know what my limitations are, and we wanted to do this quickly, Could we have created a surgical guide for this patient?
And I'll just
Absolutely.
jump in there. I have to just jump in there. I heard an
Yeah.
argument today, somebody saying brain guided was pure freehand. And the truth is that you had seen a CBCT before you did that and did the surgery in your head. That's what you mean by it, correct?
Yes. So the origin of brain guided was really from someone that was doing online courses saying that you don't need expensive technology. You don't need to use all of this digital stuff and cone beam. You can do these cases freehand. And what that description was freehand without cone beam CT, but also doing it in a totally flapless design without really seeing where the bone is. And that's brain guided in a bad way. So my description, what I took over and what I created brain guided implantology was to say, yeah, we're going to use our brain, and that brain is going to interpret all of this information and digest it from the cone beam CT to creating surgical guides if we wanted to, or to doing it in this fashion, which is why I'm showing these slides, because still the vast majority of clinicians are still doing implants freehand. And so if you're going to do it freehand, at least do it with the diagnostic freehand method, which we described in many articles in our textbook with Dr. Marco Rinaldi and Angelo Matolo. We have this classification of guided implants protocols. And so when you have all that information, your chances of making a mistake have been minimized. So what we want to do is we want to minimize our complications. And the same thing when we're trying to load the implant. I will not load an implant unless I truly know that it is at an ISQ value, an implant stability quotient value, that's within that realm that I know that for this case, I could load that implant immediately and make it a temporary tooth. And then diagnostic freehand, we're still getting this implant at the screw axis hole directly through the middle of the tooth, and we can deliver for this 84-year-old patient in a very acceptable restoration that she's very, very happy with. Now, that's just an example of diagnostic freehand. We can take this to a whole nother level and become very, very sophisticated as we utilize more technology for more complicated cases. But I believe that a single tooth implant sometimes is one of the most complicated cases. And interestingly enough, when I started my career, and people used to say to me all the time, I don't need a CT. Before we had cone beam, I don't need a CT. And today it's I don't need a cone beam CT. I can use my brain. You can't. It's just not good enough. And then I hear, I'm only going to use cone beam CT for the complicated cases, for the really complicated ones. And my response is, how do you know if it's complicated? Until you see the cone beam CT. And when you get the cone beam CT and you go, wow, I didn't know that there was a curve to that root, or I didn't know that there was pathology on the adjacent tooth, or I didn't know that there was lacking of a buccal plate in a certain area. You don't know. And that's the problem with not understanding how we use technology today.
That is an amazing case that looks simple, but you made it simple thanks to your incredible skills, and obviously the fact that you had that awesome CBCT in the beginning, and of course the knowledge of your ISQ. Scott, thank you for that case. Amazing. I would like to pass the word back to Roberto Carta. Here he is. Hi, Roberto. Wasn't that an amazing case?
It was, and before seeing the case, it was an awesome discussion and very honest. Thank you, Scott and Miguel. It was really very straightforward. I really appreciated it. So let me introduce you to my colleague, Cheryl Hayes, who is the product manager for our dental practice management software portfolio in the EMEA region. Hi, Cheryl. How are you?
Hey, how are you? I'm really good, thank you. And thanks for allowing me to participate on your webinar this evening to come in and talk about a topic that perhaps not everybody knows that Carestream Dental is part of, but we have a nearly 40-year history with practice management software globally. We have a very big footprint in the US, and I know, Scott, that in your practices you use SoftDent. And I'm just going to ask you, what, from your perspective, is the important elements of having a practice management software that integrates so well with your imaging technology?
Well, thank you, Cheryl, and it's nice to see you. I hope everything is safe in where you are. I know it's a little bit crazy all over the world right now. Practice management software obviously is the heart and soul of most of the practices in the US, and I'm sure around the world, where we can do that. And as we might have been discussing earlier today, the concept of having a link for all of the technology to be basically embedded together is what that represents. And so when we have our, as an example, when I have my patient come in for a cone beam CT scan using the CS9600, we have that data set, and then we move the patient into an operatory to do an intraoral optical scan with the 3700. We are immediately taking that patient's record from the database, pops up on the screen. We can then do the scan. That scan gets then merged into the record for the patient, and we can then, of course, take that information and actually merge that STL file, that file of the intraoral scan, with the cone beam CT data set, so we can do our planning. And so we have the ability, especially with a program like SoftDent, to integrate and manage all of these elements together. And so from a practice management standpoint, I mean, that's what we need for those practices, of course, as well, that have digital X-rays, regular X-rays, not cone beam CT. Again, we have to be able to manage all of that data. And so we need a central repository for that data, for scheduling the patients, who are managing hygiene, for doing all of the normal office protocols that we have, and of course managing the flow of our patients. And now we have a way to be able to manage the flow of the information.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. I mean, the practice management software is almost the baseline for patient clinical excellence, because you need to have a system which encompasses all of the clinical information, all of the patient data, and enables you to manage your day-to-day operation in your practice. We found very much now that there is more emphasis on software in a practice environment. If you think about the technologies that you have some of our fantastic, most innovative products, sorry. So you've got the 9600 CBCT, you've got the 3700 intraoral scanner, but obviously they're very much associated with software. So you use CS Imaging version 8 and ScanFlow, and software will play a huge part in the future of dentistry. You've talked much today about education, and it's more about knowing how to use those software technologies sometimes than perhaps the machinery itself, perhaps. So we are now looking at how we can provide a greater experience to our customers of practice management software. One of the things that we found over the last year, and particularly over the last few months since the pandemic started, is that there's been a greater demand for a cloud-based service. How do you think a cloud operation for your practice would benefit both you and your patients?
Well, I think we have a number of different solutions that are out there today. And unfortunately, this pandemic has forced many of our families and friends, inside dentistry, outside dentistry, to have to live in a remote world. I think there are people that have never heard of Zoom. They may never heard of Skype, or they may have never heard of some of these other GoToMeeting, etc. But today, because of the pandemic, people have been forced to learn that this is part of everyday life today. My parents, I haven't seen now since the pandemic started in March. They live in Florida, and if it wasn't for the ability to do FaceTime and Zoom sessions and some others, we would have no ability to touch their lives. And so cloud-based solutions to be able to store all of this data and transfer the data and share the data is, without question, where we need to be. And I don't believe that we can live without it at this point.
Yeah, and with SoftDent, particularly in the US, I know that in your practice, particularly, you have an on-premise installed version of SoftDent, but we do offer SoftDent in a cloud environment. We offer a hosted solution, but we've also over the last 18 months been able to offer a true cloud-based product. So we've developed from the ground up. We've taken our 40 years of experience, and we've developed a true cloud, true browser-led dental practice management solution, and it's called Sensei Cloud. And Sensei Cloud will bring together the ability for your practice to not only run your business on a day-to-day operation by looking at things like the metrics, the data in it, the general management of your business, but we want the strongest, most possible seamless integrations between the digital technologies and the ability for your practice to run at its most efficient. So Sensei Cloud is almost the future of where we see practice management software. What do you think the important role of software and the strong merger between all of the technology that you have will be based in the future? And again, talking about your past history, I'm sure you've been in practices where you've had paper records before, and you've maybe had experience of missing files. Sensei brings such a different way of working and a new opportunity for today's modern dental practices.
Well, I have to tell you that, believe it or not, when I first opened my office in New Jersey more than 30 some odd years ago, I actually designed and created my own practice management software. So I wrote my own code for that many years ago. And of course, to the dismay of my wife, who I was, up at 4:30 in the morning, you have to remember that when we're dealing with computers back then compared to what we have today, there's, no way you can compare in terms of the power that we have. And so as this power has increased, so again, it goes back to imagination. We are now at the standpoint that we can accomplish anything based upon our imagination, and we have to be able to manage all of this data. What it means to me is, as Miguel had mentioned as well, that we actually have to have auxiliary personnel in our practice that will spend the time to manage all of this data, because as clinicians, we want to do clinical practice. Most of us don't really have the time to learn, all the ins and outs of moving the data and managing that data. As clinicians, we want to be able to see the patient. We want to be able to use the technology to do better for the patient. But I believe that you're going to be seeing an evolution of new personnel within the dental practice, and Miguel mentioned it as well, where we can have an auxiliary that manages the cone-beam CT data and the intraoral scan data, and be able to control what is in the cloud, what is not in the cloud, how to be able to transfer these files and manage remotely. And this is a huge advantage, because it gives you an immediate understanding of what's happening in your practice, minute by minute. And so that's a huge advantage. And I have to tell you one other thing, because when I first saw the name, using the word Sensei, if you have a moment, you go back to the U.S. trademark office, you will find that years ago I had a trademark on a name called Sensei Vision, because we were coming out with software that was going to be not practice management but patient education, and we called it Sensei Vision. I abandoned that patent probably about 10 years ago. I didn't keep it up, but it's still probably listed. So it's a great name.
That's really interesting, and I'm really proud that you like the name. We're really proud of that name. I mean, Sensei for us is a guide, is a teacher, and that's really how we want people to see Sensei as a product. And just to go back to a couple of points you raised there about your team and a new way of working, if we think about cloud technology, and if we think about how we can diversify the way that we operate as businesses, the ability to enable your staff to work on the business and to work using that data to build a better service for your patients in any location, whether they can't come in due to the pandemic, or because maybe they want to just fill in some time at home. Cloud-based technology is really making a difference. So thank you for your comments and your time. I'm going to hand back to Roberto.
Thank you, Cherry, for these questions. Please stay with us. Back to you, Miguel. Thank you.
Well, I always love a good discussion, and honestly, Cheryl, that was incredible, and I really look forward to seeing this this software in more countries around the world. Scott, I'm not sure if you were aware, but last year, towards the end of 2019, Carestream Dental commissioned a global consumer survey, which was aimed direct to the public. So it wasn't dentists that answered these questions. It was an online survey conducted to over 7,000 nationally represented adults across 7 global markets, and some very interesting results arose. And I've checked out this whole survey. It was quite impressive, and we found that 25% of people have not been to the dentist in 2 or plus years. And out of this group, 2 out of 5 would be motivated to go with education on dental technology. So basically they said 2 out of 5 said that they would be motivated to go if they had education on dental technology. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, no, I think that, first of all, the pandemic that we're all involved with right now is also creating an atmosphere where people are not going to the dentist in many areas. They're not going even to their physician because they're afraid. And so the fact that we will have technology as an example, we can do telemedicine. We can communicate with our patients remotely, as we're doing right now with each other. And so all of that technology enhances the patient experience and builds confidence that we as clinicians have their best interests at heart, and we care about their oral health. And so all of the technology that we can use to be able to educate our patients, and of course educate our colleagues as well, it will always be a benefit to the world.
And as an ambassador for slow dentistry, I think that it's an important time also to slow down, see fewer patients, and practice safety as a philosophy. I know mental health is a huge issue out there under this pandemic crisis we're living in, and a word of caution to all those practitioners cramming in as many patients as they can. It's not just about your safety or your patient's safety, it's about your team. It's about your receptionist, it's about your co-workers, and it's about getting home safe. And one of the good things, as you said, about digital technologies is that, even a smartphone, just being able to interact with your patient. But by no means should the public stop going to their dentist. Should they stop seeking medical care? Because, even a simple toothache can progress into something more complex, and then, overwhelm the already overwhelmed emergency facilities, because sometimes people don't even know where the problems are arising from. And that is why a CBCT as a standard diagnostic tool in adults is, at least once, is a good thing to do. So on that, my friend, I'll ask you one last question. Do you think that now more than ever is a time to invest in digital technologies in the dental practice, in the dental universe?
Well, I think it's absolutely the time. I think it's essential. I think that the state of the art today is such that, we talk about telemedicine and we're talking about the remote connections, etc. We have such a vast library of information that's out there, whether it's with Carestream, whether it's with any other company that we're dealing with. You go to some of the outlets like YouTube or any other social media outlets where you can learn about all of this technology. So we don't have to necessarily, have someone come and train us at our office, although that's really the best thing to do. In this pandemic, it's very difficult. But if you want to learn about technology, just do a search. Look on the internet. Look at the different avenues that have so much content. There's so much stuff on some of the Carestream products, so many videos, so many wonderful case presentations, etc. And that's something that, you know, if you have downtime, that you can spend the time, and then you'll be able to know how you can utilize the technology and improve your ability to treat our patients better. And so, yeah, I think now is a great time to be able to invest in improving the quality of care that we can deliver to all of our patients.
That's a fantastic reply. And of course, as a fellow board member, dentists can also sign up to one of the co-sponsors of this amazing series of interviews, which is the Digital Dentistry Society, to find out also more about the wonderful world of digital dentistry. Scott, what can I say? Blown away by your generosity, your humility, and your deep understanding of the historic evolution of digital dentistry, and the fact that you're off now to do, I'm sure, a full arch of digitally guided implant surgery. I'm blown away by your energy, your charisma, and I look forward to hugging you again very soon, my friend.
Yes, and please stay safe. Send my best to your family, and I really appreciate Carestream for putting this all together. And I truly am looking forward to hearing from our wonderful esteemed colleagues, all within the confines of our Digital Dentistry Society, which is one of the, if not the foremost organization for digital dentistry in the world. And please visit the Digital Dentistry Society's websites as well. And there are ambassadors in countries all over the world now.
Thank you so much. Roberto, my friend, thank you so much for allowing me to do this. What an amazing idea you had, bringing all of this together. Truly a master at your job. Thank you, Roberto. Back to you.
Thanks to you, Miguel, for accepting. I'm very grateful to Scott. We took away much of your time today, but it was really fantastic. And thank you, Cheryl. It was a fantastic topic, and I thank you also for your, for being so straightforward, for being so frank in your opinions. Also, a very big thank you to the audience for your participation and questions. Please join us for the following interviews. Tomorrow night, the topic will be data acquisition and planning of surgical therapies with Dr. Giuseppe Luongo and Dr. Fabrizio Luongo. So good night, and please stay safe.